Wonderful. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining. I'll just let everyone filter through and then we'll make a start. Apologies for the couple of minutes over 12. We've had a few technical issues, but everything's been resolved, so we're all ready to make a start. So just before we start, I'll just introduce myself and I'll hand over to Adetunji so that we can kind of do a bit of introduction into why we're all here. So my name is Annabelle James. I work for Action Sustainability, which is the company behind the carbon footprint calculator, which is why we're all here today. And after the introduction, I'll just go into what the platform is and do some demos so you can kind of understand how to start recording your carbon emissions. So I'll hand over now to Adetunji.
Okay. Um, Thanks, Annabelle. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining today. My name is Adetunji. I'm the Group Head of Energy and Carbon for Wates Group. And as part of our commitment to the environment, we have set science-based targets, which both the interim, the short-term, near-term target and the long-term net zero target. And one of the things we've recognized as a business is, and I'm sure you all have as part of our valued supply chain, that we carbon reductions and climate change, addressing climate change in general is not something we can do as an individual. It's a collective effort. Therefore, we need yourselves to be part of this. Hence, we've asked you to join this session today. And it all begins from understanding what our carbon emissions are from our various operations, our various undertakings as business entities. Because until we're able to calculate what our emissions are, the ability to manage it and address the hotspots within our emissions will be quite difficult. So what Waits have done is to partner with the Supply Chain Sustainability School, and they have a carbon calculator, which covers all carbon scopes and all areas of our operations and potential areas of carbon emissions, whether it be transport in our buildings, materials, um, or in some combustion activity. So that the tool is been made available free to yourselves. And today's session is about understanding how the tool works. It's really easy. It's a very good tool, as good as any other you would be paying for elsewhere. But we have partnered with the Supply Chain School, and we are one of the partners on the Supply Chain Sustainability School. Hence, we have pulled resources together across the industry and with the school to make the tool available. So today, what the team will be doing is just taking you through the tool and explaining how to do input various aspects and answer some questions and what your carbon emissions will look like at the end within a sort of summary report, so that way you can begin to use the tool. Now there is an expectation from us, because you form as a supply, as our value supply chain partners, you form a critical part of our scope 3 emissions. So what we want to use this opportunity for is to bring the tool to you so that you can calculate your emissions and then also be able to apportion to Wates um, a portion of that emissions based on your turnover, all of which Annabelle is going to go through in a few minutes. So I just want to say, it's Friday, it's a very cold day and across every part of the United Kingdom. But we're really glad you made it here, and we want to make this hour really worthwhile for yourselves. So please, thank you, and let's listen on as I pass back to Annabelle.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for the introduction, and I hope that provides a bit of context why we're here. And I just want to reiterate, we're really grateful that you've come, and hopefully you'll find the session really useful. And by the end, have a much better idea of kind of what the carbon calculator is, why it's important, and how you can actually do your carbon report as well. So just a bit of an outline of this session. What I'll do is I'll go into just a bit of kind of an introduction and what the calculator is, how it works. And then what I'll do is go into an actual demo portion where I'll kind of show you through the reporting interface. I'll show you what information is asked. And throughout that, I'll kind of show you some tips and tricks of where to get information from, how to basically kind of make it easier for you to do your reporting. And then what we'll do at the end, we'll have time for questions, which we can then go through. So that's the format. What I'll do is I'll share my screen and yeah, get started. So hopefully you can now see my slide deck. So just for reference, this is for Waits' supply chain. But this report, before I kind of start, it's one report 1 year, and it's not just for Waits, so it's for your overall organisation's activities. I'll go into more detail, but just so you know that um, this is something that you can apply to, across multiple of your clients. But yeah, so I've gone through an agenda. So I guess kind of just as a starting point, I won't go into this too much detail because hopefully we all kind of know, but obviously climate change is something that is becoming a more and more pressing issue. It's something, we're seeing on the news more and more about the increased frequency of extreme weather events and about kind of the environmental impact that, we are all having on the environment, and the kind of carbon emissions which are contributing to this. So I think it's really kind of important to just kind of stress that, we all have an individual responsibility, and also all us as organisations have a responsibility to start actually not only recording our carbon emissions, but then actually taking steps to reduce them. But obviously, to be able to do that, we need to know what our emissions are as an organisation to begin with. So I think it's really important just to kind of bear in mind that this is something that fits into a far wider puzzle, and it's something that we all need to kind of be collaborative in working towards to kind of um, make a difference and help us all, really. So before I get into the actual carbon calculator itself, what I'll do is go very high level over basically carbon accounting in a very high level way, just so you've got an idea of how it works and where kind of emissions come from. So at a very high level, kind of carbon emissions are broken down into three what we call scopes, basically categories. So scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. So scope 1 is emissions that you as an organisation directly produce. That's things like company owned vehicles, the emissions that driving those vehicles emit. That would be a scope 1 emission. Scope 2 is essentially anything to do with electricity. And then scope 3 is everything else, really. So things like your waste, your water usage, just kind of transportation for third party and that sort of thing. As I said, you don't need to know this to do the carbon calculator exercise and to report your emissions. It's just really, if you are interested, that's kind of how it works, and is the basis of the carbon calculator. So again, for any of you who are interested, the carbon calculator follows the greenhouse gas protocol, which is a recognized standardized industry way of basically carbon accounting and how to do it. And we use the government DEFRA, basically conversion factors to calculate the emissions. So everything's basically up to date and aligned with the industry standard, for any of you who are interested in how we kind of get to those calculations. As I said, that'll make a little bit more sense as we go through the presentation and looking at the demo, but just in case anyone's interested and before I kind of get a start on the tool itself. So what is the carbon footprint calculator? So hopefully the clue's in the name. It's really an online platform that's designed for you to measure your organization's carbon footprint. So as I said before, it's not just for projects relating to Wates. You are able to calculate your organization's carbon footprint as a whole using this platform for free, which especially, if you haven't done this before, is a really, really valuable tool for you to be able to actually start getting sight of your company's emissions. And you get your own personalized dashboard. And yeah, again, I'll show you this in situ later on, but just so you're kind of aware, it's your own personal dashboard, and basically you enter raw activity data, so things like your water usage or electricity usage, and then the system calculates the carbon emissions associated with those activities using those conversion factors that I spoke about. So you don't have to do the calculations yourself, you're simply entering direct data and the system does the rest for you. And one of the main benefits is that once you've submitted a report, that feeds into your own dashboard in the system. And with that, then we have things called indicators, which are kind of KPIs. And basically, what you can do is actually see where are your carbon emissions coming from? Is your materials usage, is that mostly significantly contributing to your overall company's emissions? Is your company transport, etc.? So you can really start having a look at hotspots of within your organization's kind of everyday operation, which hopefully will be really, really valuable, and to start kind of get you thinking about where are your emissions coming from. Because as I said before, in order to be able to reduce your carbon emissions, you need to know what they are in the first place. And just on that as well, I'll just kind of take this moment just to say that if you're sitting here thinking, we've already calculated this, we already know our carbon emissions as a company, we've used an external tool, we've calculated ourselves, we know our scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emissions, that's absolutely fine. You can still use the carbon footprint calculator for that. We have two forms of the report. We've got the full report, which is the one I was previously talking about, but we also have a simplified report, which is basically a pared back version that enables you to enter your carbon emissions in terms of scope 1 and scope 2 and scope 3 directly into the system and then distribute those emissions to your clients. So if you're in that position where you already know your carbon emissions, you've already done this exercise, you can simply enter the direct numbers and then apportion to Wates, so distribute your emissions to Wates and to other clients. And so it kind of works for everyone depending on kind of where you're starting from and where you are. So just to kind of reiterate, as I said before, if you are doing that full form report, the system takes your raw activity data that you've entered. It applies what are called emission factors. That's basically DEFRA. And then also for the material section, we actually use Bath ICE conversion factors just because they're a bit more comprehensive. And basically, it system automatically calculates for 1 litre of water, what are the carbon emissions associated with using 1 litre of water, for example, and that's then how the carbon emissions in your dashboards are calculated. So how does this fit into a bigger picture? So obviously Wates are asking you as part of their kind of core priority suppliers to submit your carbon emissions and then apportion to Wates to make a part of their supply chain. But you're sitting in kind of a group of over 1,700 suppliers now who are also reporting their carbon emissions and apportioning to the different clients. And you can see a selection of the different kind of clients and school partners on the board who are using the carbon calculator to measure their supply chain emissions. So you might see companies here that you also have projects with. We also have more, and this is just kind of what fit on the slide. But so you can really do this one report and then actually apportion and distribute your emissions to more than just one client. So you can obviously do to Wates, but if, for example, you've got a project with Unipart Rail, you can apportion your emissions to them. If Morgan Sindall you're doing a project with, you can apportion to them. So it's really, really an opportunity for you to just reduce the reporting burden, the administrative time that it takes to do your carbon reporting exercise, because you can do one report once a year and then apportion to several of your clients in one go. So you're not having to report on one platform for one client, one for another. And we've got lots of different clients using it. It's really well regarded as kind of really excellent in the industry, standardized way of carbon reporting. So as you know, I said, it's really an opportunity to just kind of streamline that process for you. And you're part of a much wider cohort of suppliers across different supply chains who are using this platform to do this carbon reporting process. So just at a high level, I'll go through kind of the top features, which I've already touched on, but just to summarize, and then I'll go into the actual demo part where I'll show you what the reporting interface looks, how best to develop the report, tips and tricks, and then we'll go kind of quickly to look at the dashboards just so you can see what that looks like once you've submitted the report, and then we'll have a Q&A at the end. So just to summarize, the carbon calculator calculates carbon emissions as it says in the tin and using that raw activity data. You then distribute your emissions to your clients. So this distribution we call apportionment. So basically what that is that you apportion a percentage of your carbon emissions to Wates based on your overall turnover for 2024 and your spend with Wates. So for example, if your turnover was £10 million and you got a contract worth £1 million with Wates, you'd apportion 10% of your company's emissions for 2024 to Wates. So that's the principle of how the emissions are distributed. It's based on revenue, and that can then be applied to other clients that you also have that appear in the reporting interface, which I'll show you later on. As I said before, we've got those two forms of reports. We've got the simplified report and the full form report. The simplified report is for those of you who've already calculated your carbon emissions outside the carbon calculator, and the full form is if you want to use it for that raw data to actually calculate it using the system. As I mentioned before, it's an annual report, so you only have to submit one report once a year for a selection of different clients, which really helps to kind of reduce the reporting burden. And finally, one of the beneficial kind of aspects for you is that you get your own dashboard, which has different graphs and different kind of different components that you can kind of analyze your data and see where your emissions are coming from, and just kind of trends over time as well. When you have submitted, more than 1 year's worth of data, you can have a look at over time what are our emissions kind of looking like over the course of a few years. And that's basically what I was describing there. So what I'll do now is I will get up the portal and just kind of show you in situ what the reporting interface looks like. So just to clarify, this is a demo account. I'm not showing any company secrets by showing you this. It's a made up account just for demonstration purposes. So once you've created an account and logged into the carbon calculator, I'll show you how to do that afterwards. But it's very straightforward. It's just like signing up to anything else really with your name and password, and email address, etc. You'll be taken to the report straight away. So when you log in, you'll be taken automatically to the new report. So you'll see here that it's broken down into 4 steps. So these 4 steps are just to help make it easier to kind of navigate through the report and see which sections you've completed, which you haven't. So you can see here, we've got this kind of orangey yellow question marks. That just means that section is not completed. So for example, step 1, you'd go to reporting period and report type. This is a very straightforward section. All you're doing in this section is selecting which year you want the report to be for and whether you already know your carbon emissions. So if you already know your carbon emissions, as I said before, you'd click the yes this question and it'll take you to the simplified report. For the purpose of this demo, I'm going to go to the full form report, but I'll show you which tabs are in the simplified report, just so you've got an idea. But essentially, you're just submitting your scope 1, 2, and 3, and then we'll kind of look at the actual what that looks like in situ in the dashboard as well. So just to kind of note on this reporting period is that you can see here it says 1st of January to the 31st December. So for a lot of you, you may be reporting in line with the calendar year, but we appreciate that some organisations you may be kind of operating in line with the financial year. So if you are, you can report your data in line with the financial year. We just ask that you put a note in the report, and I'll show you where to do that, just to specify what year that data is for, just so we kind of just have a record that it's for, for example, April 2024 to March 2025, for example. So just take that with a pinch of salt, but the 2024 report, a lot of you probably will be reporting on the calendar year. It just really depends on your organisation. Once you complete this, you click save, and then you can see that goes to a green tick, so you know you've completed that section. The second step is company information. So this is some kind of high level information. And the idea of this is we've started asking for this in the reports because we want to be able to create industry benchmarks. So in order to do that, we need to collect this data. So basically, the idea is you can select your sectors, as many sectors as are applicable, your kind of organization type, where you operate, the size, and basically what these kind of categories are then going to be used for is to create this benchmark. So that's a future development we want to look at making, and the benefit of that will be that you'll be able to then see how your company kind of sits within your industry, within companies of your similar size, etc. So you can kind of see, relatively speaking, what your emissions as an organization are like. But in order to do that, we need to collect information to create the benchmark in the first place. So that's what this tab's for. When you've completed these sections, you click save, and then that would go to a green tick. It hasn't because I haven't completed it. And then the third step is the actual carbon report itself. So this is the main part of the report, and this is where probably you'll spend the most time actually inputting your information. So you'll see here that it's broken down into a selection of tabs across the top. So I appreciate that opening this, it looks quite like quite a lot of tabs, quite a lot of information, but it's broken down like that to just really make it more straightforward and simpler to actually know what data to collect and to submit it. And just for peace of mind, a little sneak preview, the transport tab is fairly long, but for example with water, that's a very short tab. So they're not all as kind of have many metrics or many data points in them, just in case any of you were alarmed. So what I'll do with this is I'll go through the transport tab in a bit more detail, just to kind of show you how to submit the report, how to complete it, what to look for, tips and tricks and things. And then what I'll do is I'll go through the kind of remainder of the tabs a little bit more high level, just to show you what information is asked for, because I appreciate if I was going through every tab in I was going to say excruciating detail, but maybe in detail, that may be a little bit arduous. So just for your reference, we'll do the transport tab in a bit more detail, and then I'll kind of just show you the sort of information that's requested in the other tabs, just in the interest of time and interest. So the transport tab. So this section, you can see automatically it's kind of separated into two sections. We've got the company transport and third party transport. So the differences here is that the company transport is for vehicles that are owned or operated by your organisation. So that's things like company cars, fleet vehicles, or kind of anything like that. And basically, with any of these sections, you'll see that there's an icon next to the kind of bold headings, and this is where there's more information about that section. So what I'd really recommend is when you're doing the report, if you're like, oh, what does that mean? If you hover over that I, you'll get a kind of quite a detailed explanation of what that section's actually asking for, so which hopefully will kind of help you with that reporting process. So you see here, this is for vehicles owned directly by your organisation or controlled. And then third party transport is basically any other transport. So any business travel, employee commuting, that sort of thing would go under this section. So with the report, one of the top tips that I always give that sounds really obvious, but I think it's always worth reiterating is to check the units. And just because for these options, we've got the option to toggle between kilometres and miles, but for a lot of the other sections, the units are static. And so it's really important that when we're going through that you just check what unit that piece of information needs to be in, and because otherwise, if you've entered the data thinking it's kilograms, it's actually tons, obviously that's going to have quite significant implications on your emissions. And you can change the report if needed, but it's really important just to kind of get it right first time. So I'd really say one of the main takeaways from the report is always check the units as a first step. With the metrics, so just for clarification, each of these sections, we refer to them as metrics, basically data points that you enter data against. With this, if you don't have any diesel cars operated or controlled by your organization, you simply select NA. And if you do have petrol cars, for example, you then enter the number of miles here. It's important to note that all of the metrics in the report are mandatory. So it's really important that you make sure that you either enter data or you click NA, and that's just to make sure you haven't missed any, basically. But you will get a little flag up here. If I try to do this now, it won't let me do it. So basically, just to make sure that you do enter data across everything. With this, if I was to enter, let's say, 56 miles, um, obviously that can be, you can do it as many different places as you want, but just make sure that when you are entering the data that you are entering it correctly, not missing off any zeros, etc. And kind of sometimes that can happen. With this, you'll see here that you can have the option to do you have any other types. So this is just really to kind of to clear up the reporting interface, but there's more options here, such as hybrid cars, electric vehicles, motorbikes, etc. And then the third party transport with the other types of travel, we've got even more. So we've got all of those, plus we've got domestic air travel, international train travel, taxis, buses, etc. So you can really go into quite a lot of granularity with the third party transport. And on that brings me nicely to my next point, which is like in an ideal world, we have primary data which is directly collected for all of these, but we appreciate that you might not have all of this data, and particularly if you're doing this for the first time. So really, one of the main things that I think I want to kind of convey is that we don't expect you to have all of this data. If you only have, say, information on transport, electricity, water, maybe, I don't know, you can still enter that and just kind of don't let perfection be the enemy of good. Really submit the data that you have and don't let that stop you from submitting the full report. I think what one of the main kind of principles of the carbon calculator is that you can use this to start thinking about what could we as an organization start collecting in order to get a more accurate view of our carbon footprint as a company. So I think that, if you currently aren't collecting information on your waste usage, for example, you can maybe think about how could we start doing that, for example. So it's really just about submit what you've got. Obviously, the more information you have, the better, the more accurate that your carbon footprint will be. But if you have missing data, you can't submit what you don't have, but don't let that stop you from submitting the report. And if you don't have primary data for all these, you can kind of use proxy or sample data as a kind of substitution, which is still a really valid way of collecting data. Obviously, primary data, so that's kind of direct data that you've collected, is the most accurate, but proxy data can be a really good substitution, especially if you kind of don't have primary data yet. So a really good example of this would be you might not know exactly for 2024, you haven't been collecting the exact number of miles that employees have been commuting to and from the workplace, for example. But you do know that, for an employee, the distance that they live from their place of work, and like on average over the year, the number of days they've traveled to that place of work. So what you could do with that is, say, for example, an employee lives 10 miles from their place of work and they go to that office 3 days a week. That's 60 miles over each week. So over the course of the year, you can calculate that as approximation. Similarly, if that's too granular for you to do kind of at this stage, you could take it one step kind of more broadly and take an average of, so you say, right, we've got 50 employees on average, and these 50 employees go to the workplace, so 2 times a week, for example, and on average, they live 15 miles away. So you could just do an average across the year of the average distance that an employee travels, the average number of days they go in, and calculate an approximation for the number of miles traveled in that vehicle type. So that's a really valid way of doing it. With anything like that, I always kind of recommend that you add your methodology in this comment section. This is really mainly for your benefit, just so you know how you've got to that figure. And it might be really useful as then, next year when you're looking at submitting a 2025 report, you can just, if you can't remember how did we collect the data, where did we get that from, you can just go back into this report and just see, oh, okay, yeah, we calculated doing X, Y, and Z. So it's just really helpful just to kind of keep a little log of how you've got to your figures. So I'd really recommend you make use of this comment section. This won't be used for any reason, it's just for you to have a bit of a note of kind of what you've done. So yeah, just to kind of reiterate, primary data is preferred, but you can kind of calculate proxy data in the absence of that primary data. So what I'll do now is I'll go through the rest of the tabs, but in less detail, because I appreciate that we don't want to go in that much detail for every tab here because, it's Friday and we've got other more important things to cover as well. So yeah, I'll go through the rest of the tabs now. So with the fossil fuels tab, this section is quite a bit shorter, and this is really for kind of plant and machinery fuel usage. So you see here a selection of fuels, and there's also here actually other fuel types as well, not listed. Again, that's just to make it more streamlined, the actual reporting interface. This is a prime example of where it's really important to make sure you're always looking at the units. You can see here it flicks between litres, kilograms, and kilowatt hours, obviously depending on the fuel type. So it's really important to always make sure that the data you're entering is reflective of the units in the system. And with this as well, just an important point to make, if you, with your with your transportation information, if you don't know the number of miles that are being traveled, but actually you do know how much fuel you've used, for example, in terms of liters, you can enter it here instead, but it's just really important to not double up on that. And again, I just put a comment in here just to explain what that value is representing, but just that option is available if you do collect data like that. Fugitive emissions, this is emissions from refrigerants. Probably a lot of you won't have this information, but it's just, if you do have it, enter it here, and you can see a drop-down list of different gases. Electricity is one of my personal favourite tabs because it's one of the shortest. This is essentially your grid electricity usage across the year. Obviously, if you operate across different sites, that'll be the aggregation of those sites, basically add together the annual electricity usage. You should be able to get this information from electricity bills and basically just add the numbers together, and making sure it's in kilowatt hours. These yes and no here are optional, so it's just if you do have a renewable energy tariff, you can enter that here. And if you do generate any energy on site, so you've got any solar panels, any, wind turbines, etc., you can add the kilowatt hours of electricity generated on site as well, which will kind of offset the electricity usage that you've used. So yeah, but if you haven't got these, just click no, enter your kilowatt hours here and press mark section is complete. This is a really good example. So this is a test account that says all the numbers are fake, but if you enter a value that is significantly different to the value you submitted in this report for the previous year, what it'll do is it'll come up with this little flag, which is a little kind of validation mechanism, which just shows you that, so it says this value is significantly different to the average of the previous 4 entries. So you can see here this number is far higher than that average of the last 4 reports. So if I was to remove a couple of decimal places and maybe change that to a 2, you'll see that then disappears because it's far closer to the average. You can still submit your report if it's being flagged, but it's just a little mechanism to just notify you that that number you've entered is very different to the previous entries, just to make sure that it is actually correct. And it might be that your company has grown, you've used a lot more electricity, which is absolutely fine, but it's just to kind of notify you of that that when you've completed a tab at this, you can then mark section as complete, and you'll see that the little green tick appears. So that's when you know that that section has been completed. An important thing also to note is that this full report auto saves continuously, so you can dip in and out of the report. You don't have to worry about saving it. You can go in one day, enter your electricity usage, and then you could log in a few days later and enter your water, just as and when you kind of get that data kind of flowing through. So you can really dip in and out, and you can have as many colleagues kind of attached to your carbon calculator account with access. So you can have multiple people coming in and entering different data if that works better for you. But conversely, you can also just have one person who's responsible for entering this data. It's really up to you how you think best it would work, but you have that flexibility to kind of do what you see fit for your organisation. The materials tab, I'd imagine pretty quite a lot of you are using materials as part of your operations with the nature of weights of supply chain. So with this, we've got 2 sections. We've got the first bit, which is manufacturing products from raw materials, and the second is handling. So the difference with that is if you're a concrete manufacturer, you'd enter the data in the first section. If you're a groundwork laying the concrete, you do the second. So it's really just that differentiation whether you're actually producing the material or using the material, and that's just kind of the differentiation there. So each section is identical with the terms of the drop-down list. So what happens is, you can see I was playing around with it earlier. You can see that you can select different types from this drop-down list, as many as you want. So if you want to steel, you can add then your steel usage here. With this as well, you'll notice, for example, with steel, we've got the option to enter low carbon steel. So that's just if you've started making steps to reduce your organization's emissions, you can record that here to reflect it. And the same with carbon, with concrete, we've got an option to enter against low carbon concrete. So that's just little ways that you can kind of start demonstrating your commitments to reduce your emissions and have that reflect your report. With this, all the units are in tons, but just make sure that you are looking at the units when you are actually going through this. And it's basically, yeah, this section is the same drop down, just different. If you don't have a material listed, if you use a material that's not listed in this drop down, you can't report against it because it's not in the drop down. But what I would say is, if there is a material that you use as part of your operations that's not in the drop down list, if you email me and just let me know we use X and this doesn't appear in the drop down list, because what I'll do is I always kind of have a continual, I'm always collecting material types, examples that suppliers use. And when we've got, a few suppliers asking for the same material, we'll add it to the drop-down list and use the DEFRA conversion factors. So for the meantime, you won't be able to submit the data against that. But if you let me know, I can kind of put that forward as a future development to add to the system. With waste, this section, if you click yes to this, is kind of broken down into different waste types, so like refuse waste, plastic waste, etc. It's fairly straightforward to fill out. It's really, if you've got paper and board waste, you click yes, and then you say, okay, we I don't know, we recycle it or we compost it, whatever, and you basically can just record the waste type and the destination of that waste. As I said, if you don't have this data, you can't submit it, but it's just if you do have it, um, enter it. And this is the kind of area where, and this is something you should start looking at. Okay, maybe as a company we should start recording our waste data, for example, because that's a key part of your carbon emissions as an organisation. So that's this section, and then obviously the market section is complete. My number one favourite tab is the water tab, because it is one question. So that is just your water usage across your organisation for 2024 in litres. So hopefully that one's a fairly straightforward one to get, and basically just an aggregation of those numbers for the year. A fairly new addition we've got to the carbon calculator is a home working section. So this is really just to reflect the fact that increasingly more and more of us are working from home, myself included. So it's just really, if you've got any employees which are operating from home, you can add their home working hours here. So again, with this one, these ways to do this is kind of calculation. Maybe you've got 50 employees who work 2 days a week at home, for example, and you basically just calculate the hours that those employees across the year are working from home, and add that there. This tab is basically other emissions. This is just, if you click yes to this, if you've got any other information on anything, a part of your organization that you know the scope 1, scope 2, or scope 3 emissions from. So a prime example of this is if you've got company kind of computers and laptops and things, sometimes the manufacturer will, tell you what we call embodied carbons, basically the carbon emissions that were involved in the production of that product. So if you know that, you can answer that here. But this section, you do not have to enter anything here. If you don't have anything, don't enter it. It's just if you've got any extras, this is where you can enter it. And just to kind of say back to my earlier point about that simplified report. So in that first step I showed you, where you select the calendar year and also the report type. If you do click yes, your emissions, the page will refresh, and then when you go to this report, it'll be a simplified report. It'll just have 3 tabs, 1, 2, 3, like that. And the 3 tabs are basically these last 3 tabs here. It's just other maybe emissions, policy and strategy, and company information. So that's all you'll see on your screen. And that all that is basically very similar to this page, where you just enter your company's carbon emissions in terms of scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 for 2024 directly. And then you will fill out these last 2 tabs as well, like the full form reports. Just if you will be going down that avenue, that's what that looks like. Very straightforward, and it shouldn't take you too long to do. The last 2 tabs are qualitative tabs, so this is just more information around your kind of organization rather than direct data itself. So this tab is policies and strategies. So what this is really an opportunity for you as an organisation to show Wates to other clients, just your commitments to sustainability, what you're doing, and to, just start taking responsibility for your organisation's emissions. If you don't have anything on this, you're not going to be penalised for that. It should really so that, we know and Wates know kind of where you're at with this process, be really useful. And again, one of the main things you can take away from this is start thinking about what sort of things as a company you could start doing. You could start maybe looking at setting science-based targets. And I know that Waits are kind of keen to have, I think about 80% of their supply chain ultimately with science-based targets, for example. So just things like that that you can just start thinking about if you're not doing so already. But say, for example, if you do have set science-based targets, you can click yes, and then you can also upload documentation to evidence that. So you can really show, wait, yeah, we've done this, for example, or you've got greenhouse gas reduction targets, or etc. You can kind of basically just show what you're doing. The last tab is very straightforward. This is your turnover and your number of employees. So at this point, I just want to make it really clear that Waits aren't going to see your full turnover. None of your other clients will see this. The only people who can see your full turnover will be me and my colleagues and your colleagues, basically. And we obviously will not share that information with anyone. That is completely confidential. But really, why we ask for this is because in your dashboard, you have an option to see your emissions per £1 million of turnover. And that's really useful for you to be able to see over time your relative emissions. Because if, for example, your emissions might go up, they might go up 25% from 2024 to 2025, for example, but actually your company has doubled in size. Actually, relatively speaking, the emissions per £1 million of turnover will have actually gone down. So you can kind of see, even if your company's growing, you can see the relative carbon emissions that you're producing, which would be really useful. Particularly kind of, if you've done this a few years in a row, see those trends over time. And I guess that kind of feeds into this full report, is that Wates and any of your other clients never see your full report. They only see the sliver that you said, yeah, that relates to Wates. They represent 10% of my overall turnover 2024. So they see 10% of everything in this report. But the key thing is that Wates don't know that's 10%. So Wates will never know what percentage of your turnover they represent. So, they might represent 25% of your turnover, but they'll never know that. So it's really important, and they never will know that. We'll never tell them that. So that's just really important to note that all information is all protected. Once you've completed this, you'd click done. Obviously, I'm not going to do that because I haven't completed it. And then you're taken to the last section. So this section is the apportionments. This is where you can then distribute your emissions to your clients. So obviously, Wates have asked you to report as part of their key supply chain. So you click Wates, and they might represent, I don't know, 5.678% of your, that's only very similar to the previous value I did, but say they might represent 5.678% of your turnover. You can do this figure to as many decimal points as you want, and I'd really recommend that you make this as accurate as possible because that'll influence what emissions are distributed to Weights, for example. So make it accurate, just as accurate as you can, really. And then once you've done that, you need to click Add here. You might then see, oh yeah, Unipart Rail, we've got a project with them. They represent this percentage. And then you might have a look down and you can see this list is really quite extensive of lots of different clients using the carbon calculator to measure their supply chain's emissions. So if, for example, Vinci Facilities, they haven't asked you to submit your carbon data, but you know that in 2024 you had a project with them and that represented 21% of your revenue, you can add that. If, for example, oh yeah, BAM, yeah, we've done something with them, I'd really just emphasize and really recommend that apportion to anyone that you've got a project with in 2024, apportion to them because the likelihood is that they might ask you separately. So if you've already reported an apportion to them, you don't then have to worry about them contacting you and having to go back in and add the apportionment retrospectively. You can do that if a client comes forward and says, oh, actually we'd like you to apportion to us and you haven't done it. You can log back in and edit the apportionment percentage. But just to say, it's honestly just easier, and then you're not pestered to just kind of apportion to everyone in one go for your 1 year report, and then you're sorted really. Once you've done this, you'd click save, and then you'll be taken back to the main page. Once you've done this, you'll obviously be able to submit it. Obviously, I haven't submitted all of the steps, so I can't submit it. But when you do, you'll then be taken to your main dashboard. This is a really important time to reiterate. This is a demo account, so the data does not make sense at all. So just to clarify, if you're thinking, what is going on with this company? Nothing, it's just fictitious. But you can see here that you have a pie chart breaking down your carbon emissions by scope. You can see the total, you can filter it by year. So you can say, oh, what were our emissions in 2023? And then it'll refresh and show you that. You can see your emissions over time. So that's that thing I was explaining about before that, you can see over, a few years what's happening. And this is that one that I was describing before, that total emissions per £1 million of turnover. So that's really, really beneficial because you can see and obviously when there's real data or actually kind of have a bit more narrative around it over a few years, what are your relative emissions? Are they going up? Are they going down? Factoring in kind of business growth, which would be really, really useful later down the line. And then you'll see here there's these two tabs here. And then if you flick to analyze hotspots, you can then actually see where your emissions are actually coming from. So that was that dashboard component that I was describing before. So one of the probably most important part here is just to clarify, you can see total, you can see by scope, but probably the most important and beneficial aspect that you can see is broken down by activity. So if you filled out that full form report listing all activities, you can then see the corresponding carbon emissions that those activities have contributed to. So you can see in this example here that actually the emissions of company transport are really, compared to the other values, significantly higher than the rest. So you can see for this example company, their emissions of company transport is their biggest contributor to their overall carbon footprint. And conversely, you can see their electricity usage is having a negligible impact. So this is really just a useful way for you to start looking at where are emissions coming from, where are hotspots, and just kind of getting a picture of your operations and what the emissions are with those different activities. With these, you can click on the bar and then a chart will appear down here showing over time. And you can also click on multiple bars as well. So you can see here, you can compare, for example, different types. So this is just if you want to kind of have a bit of play around, look at the data, see what it looks like. But yeah, what I'll do is that's the dashboard in a nutshell. What I'd say is that once you've submitted your report, have a little look through your own dashboard, just familiarize yourself and have a look around because we have, it'll make more sense when you've got your actual data in there. What I will do is just log out and just show you how you create an account. So I'll send you the link to this afterwards, but essentially what you do is take them to the carbon calculator page, and to create an account, you'd go create a supplier account here. What you do is enter your name in full, so your first name, surname, your email address, that's just your company email address, and then you create yourself a password. And then the most important part with this registration process is to make sure that when you enter your company name, that you enter it in full. So don't add an abbreviation, just enter your full company name as it's, listed kind of officially. And that's really just so that we can easily identify your account in the system, and also any colleagues who want to join your account know definitively that that is their company. If, for example, a colleague of yours has already actually created an account in the carbon calculator, maybe last year, for example, when you go to register, the next screen will say ABC Limited, is already listed in the carbon calculator. Would you like to join this company? So basically, if your organization's already created an account system, you'll then have the opportunity to join that account, and that's based off your email address domain. So it'll link it for you. And if you join that account, you'll then have access to the pre-existing account that's been created. I appreciate that I've covered a lot of content there. If you do have any questions on the specific tabs, or you want more detail on, well, where do I get this data from? What we do have is a section here called Measure Your Own Emissions. And what this is a landing page full of resources to help you with this process. So for example, basically a summary of what I've spoken about today. We've got short form videos on each tab of the report. So if, for example, you're like, oh, actually, I really want to kind of have a look more at that transport tab, you can watch this short video here to really go into more detail about that section, just in a kind of short form version, rather than watching full through full recording, for example. And one of the most important resources, if you scroll down here to the bottom, we've actually got this here, which is called the Carbon Calculator Guide. And what this is, if I get this up, is basically a full, oh, I can't just get it up, but basically it's a full carbon calculator guide, which really shows you in more detail than I covered today, but just where you can get data from, any kind of information. So I think that if you have got any questions, I'd really direct you to that. And what I'd do is I can actually attach that as a PDF to the follow-up email I send, so you've got easy access to that. But I think that's a really, really valuable resource just to kind of support you with the process. And also on that as well, you'll notice that when I've kind of dropped this little, may not notice this little blue kind of speech bubble, this is our chat bot. So basically, this is available. So for example, I log in and go to my account. Basically, you see my fake account. If, for example, you can access this from any place, but say, for example, you're doing your report and you're thinking, oh, I'm not sure why that is, you can enter your question into the chatbot. And basically what it'll do is, if it's in the part of our question database, it'll answer it. And if not, it'll triage that query to our info@sustainabilitytool.com email address, which is basically our help kind of support team, and they'll kind of resolve your query. So that's just a really easy way to get a direct answer to something. If it's, just if you've got a question about, like, I don't know, about the reporting period or something like that, you can't quite remember, I, recommend having a look at this to see if that answers your query itself. So what I'll do is I'll stop sharing now, as I appreciate we've got 8 minutes left, and I want to make sure we have enough time for questions, and also have a sip of water because I have been talking for a while. So just 1 second. Fantastic. So I appreciate we've covered a lot of content. So if you've got any questions, please add them to the chat or to the Q&A if you haven't done so already, and then we'll start going through those. But I'm not sure, Alessandra, if you've got anything you wanted to add to that. Oh, other than the deadline for this that Wates for you to submit your 2024 report is the 5th of March 2025. I'll put that in the follow-up email as well, so that you've got that written down, but just so you know the time frame that we're kind of looking to. But I'm not sure if you've got anything to add from that presentation.
Oh no, thank you, Annabelle. That was really good, Claire. And I think obviously you'll be sending a link
Yeah,
for those who've got other questions or and the guides as well, which sit in your next to the calculator to help everyone who's on the call today to understand that. So I think there are some questions. Do you want to
yeah,
take some of them? There's
yeah.
anyone that you feel I should take out?
Yeah,
I'll
perfect. So we've
pop
got a
in.
question here. What happens if clients we work with are not listed on the list? If they're not listed, you can't apportion their emissions to them, so they'll just be not registered the system, have not opted to use the platform to manage the supply chain's emissions. So you don't have to have that apportionment section adding up to 100% if you've only got for example, 25%, of your in that apportionment section. You don't have to then worry about that 75% that's missing. You just apportion to whoever's there. So yeah, if they're not listed, you don't have to worry about it. Yes, does the apportionment section have to add up to 100%? No, it does not. Answer the question naturally there. Fantastic. I know I saw a question come up in the chat as well to answer that one. So is there any further information required regarding the age of the vehicle? No. So basically, with the transport section, with all the sections, it's an average of that vehicle type and using the average DEFRA conversion factor. So you don't have to consider the age of the vehicle. You just need to put the number of miles that was travelled in the vehicle, and the age is not needed for this section. Let's have a look. Probably should start from the top actually. So let's have a look. Yes, it's a really good question about the kind of differentiation between the carbon footprint calculator, which is based on that apportionment method of calculating your organization's emissions and then apportioning based on turnover, and project by project data. So it's very much kind of the case that, for context, historically, organizations have calculated their companies and supply chains emissions through what's called spend-based analysis. Basically, that's a real approximation based on spend. So the industry generally is moving away from that because it's not very accurate. So the kind of carbon calculator intermediary, which is still simpler for you to submit one report and then apportion your emissions to your clients. But there will potentially be some clients, like you're saying, you would often extend a platform for calculator on a project by project basis. So if you have been asked by a different client to do that, then obviously do that. But I still think there's a lot of value in doing this method because you'll have other clients who aren't wanting project specific data, they just want to know the apportionment and feed it through. So I'd really recommend that use this platform because there will be clients asking. We've got more and more clients using the platform to collect their supply chain data, including Wates. So I think that definitely still value in using the system. And I think that this is definitely the direction the industry is going, is this apportionment based kind of aspect. And for project by project calculation, we have a separate tool which is used for that, but that's outside the carbon calculator. But the carbon calculator is based on that apportionments method. So
Yeah, as an entity.
yeah, perfect. So I'm just going through the questions. If I can't get through them all, I'll follow up these separately after the session as well. I appreciate we've only got 3 minutes left, and I don't want to take up more of your time and kind of go into your lunch breaks too much, which I hope a lot of you get to do after this, and let you digest all this information. So here we're saying about someone's got a PLC made up of 35 businesses. So leave that one with me. I need to double check how you do that. So just for context, I'm not sure if you could maybe add to that question about whether your clients work with one of the 35 businesses or the PLC as a whole. That would be useful to know,
Yeah.
just based on the apportionment aspect.
Yeah.
And then,
Yeah. If I may just add that, I think
yeah, of course.
it was a question that came yesterday because this is the second session for on this, and it was around whether what's required if you're part of a global entity, you
Mm-hmm.
should put in all of your global entity data in here. Just to say that as far for weights, what's required is the entity that's contracted with weights to supply. However, for those who are on the journey for science-based targets, that's a slightly different requirement because that's your highest parent. So we hopefully will run science-based targets sessions in probably next year now, and that would be picked up in that particular session, in those sessions as they come up. So slightly different approach if you're trying to do your science-based targets. That's a global, your highest parent. But for the carbon calculator for to report into weights, that apportionment that Annabelle has spoken about is the entity that's contracted to weights that needs you need to that needs to submit its emissions through the calculator.
Yes, you can
Okay.
see here we've got a question. I know we've got a little bit left. We've got a question kind of about, the I guess the apportionment method, and obviously because obviously with the apportionment method there is an element of generalization because it's not project by project, and that's the kind of compromise that the apportionment method is making in order to make it a lot more straightforward for companies to report. And I think this really fits into a wider piece. Obviously a lot of us here, you may have already done this before, but we've also got a lot of supply chains with a lot of SMEs also included in the target lists. And for an SME, they might not it's the reporting ability to try and get project specific data is so great that they're not just going to do it. So I think that it's really, there is obviously a degree of the fact that the apportionment percentage, it might not be exactly accurate because, say for example, if I don't know, your work with weights is to do with, I don't know, what, something more carbon intensive, but actually the rest of your industry or the rest of your business does other things, it's obviously going to take an average of that. But yes, that's kind of one of the assumptions. They know we've got a response to that as well. Um, and yeah, so I think that
There's a question about to the end, it says we're not a direct supplier. How can double counting be avoided? That question is not very clear, um, because the entity submitting its emissions should be contracted to wait. So, I mean, if you could make that, Manuela, I think, if you can make that clearer, maybe send a message through and we can come back and respond to that.
so not a direct supplier. So yeah, that would be good just to reiterate, because with this, in order to apportion, you need to have a direct spend or a direct contract with Wates. So you need to, or any of your other clients. So if you don't have that spend, if you're a subcontractor of one of Wates' contractors, then you won't be able to pour into Wates because you haven't got a direct spend with them. And you'd be classified as Wates' tier 2 contractor, not a tier 1.
Oh, I think it's a minute over time now.
Yeah, okay. What I'll do is I'll pick up any of those questions that we haven't had a chance to answer. I appreciate there's quite a few, but I know we kind of it's great we've got lots of questions, and I'll follow up with them afterwards just so we can all end on time, and don't want to keep everyone kind of waiting while we go through this. But thank you so much for your time today. Really, really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to attend this session. I really hope that you've got a more full picture of what the carbon calculator is, how it works, and the ask that Wates have made. To reiterate, they'd like you to submit your 2024 report by the 5th of March 2025. And as I said, I'll send the recording link and also the slide deck along with some key information, including how to register afterwards, so that you've got that to refer back to. And I'll follow up with everyone who's got kind of outstanding questions as well. So as I said, thank you for your time.
Thank
And
you.
yeah, really appreciate you attending the session today.
Thank you, everyone.